As illness drained her strength, the girl was forced to clean the floor under the watchful eye of her cruel stepmother, without the millionaire father ever noticing. But fate placed in her path a woman willing to reveal everything. With evidence, courage, and empathy, she exposes the woman who stole not only money, but also the child's time. If this beautiful story of overcoming adversity and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Continuing. The rain lashed against the windows of the sumptuous mansion in Asheville, North Carolina, in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The strong wind made the leaves of the century-old trees dance frantically, composing a natural symphony that blended with the sound of thunder. Inside the imposing house, little Beatrice, just 7 years old, dragged a wet cloth across the marble floor of the main living room, her fragile little hands trembling from the effort. "Faster, Beatrice, or you'll go to bed without dinner again," Deborah vociferated, a woman in her early 30s, with impeccably straightened hair and perfectly manicured nails, who watched the girl with disdain from the top of the grand staircase. Beatrice swallowed her tears, her frail body visibly weakened. Her large brown eyes seemed to engulf her pale, thin face. She tried to quicken her movements, but a sudden dizziness made her lean against the wall. A bottle of medicine fell from her pocket, rolling to her stepmother's feet. "What did I tell you about carrying those medicines everywhere? That's a waste of money. Your father may be a millionaire, but I'm not going to throw money away on medications that won't change anything," Deborah bellowed, picking up the bottle and putting it into the pocket of her own silk robe. The girl didn't respond. Doctors had told her father she had only a week to live. The rare lymphoma afflicting her was in its terminal stage, but that didn't stop Deborah from treating her like a servant. In fact, it seemed her stepmother had intensified the mistreatment ever since the final diagnosis had been given. "You're lucky your father is away on business," Deborah continued, descending a few steps. "Richard has always been weak when it comes to you, spoiled ever since your mother passed away. That's not good for a child." At that moment, the shrill sound of the doorbell cut through the air, startling both of them. No one was expected on that stormy night, especially in such an isolated and exclusive area of the Blue Ridge mountain range. Deborah hesitated, looking at the wall clock. "Who could it be at this hour?" "Finish that properly, Beatrice. I'll see who it is." Upon opening the door, Deborah was met by a young, soaking wet woman, visibly pregnant, with a small, worn suitcase in her hands. Her face was pale, her simple clothes clinging to her body from the rainwater. "Please, I'm sorry to bother you," the woman said with a soft but firm voice. "My car broke down on the road and there's no cell signal in this area. Could I use your phone to call a tow truck?" Deborah scrutinized the woman from head to toe with contempt and was about to refuse when a male voice sounded behind her. "Of course, you can use our phone." Richard Maxwell, a tall 45-year-old man with a neatly trimmed beard and tired eyes, appeared in the entrance hall. His early return from his business trip to Atlanta caught Deborah completely by surprise. "Richard, I wasn't expecting you today." "Change of plans," he replied dryly without looking at his wife. Turning to the visitor, he opened the door wider. "Come in, please. This storm is dangerous, especially for someone in your condition." "Thank you. My name is Louisa." "Louisa Caldwell," the woman introduced herself, timidly entering the house. Richard led Louisa to the living room, where Beatrice was still cleaning the floor. Upon seeing the girl in that state, Louisa couldn't hide her surprise. "This is my daughter, Beatrice," Richard said, noticing the visitor's gaze. He approached his daughter and gently took the cloth from her hands. "Darling, it's too late for you to be doing this. Go rest." "But Aunt Deborah said I needed to finish," the girl murmured, casting a fearful glance at her stepmother. Richard frowned, but before he could respond, Louisa carefully knelt down to Beatrice's height. "You don't look very well." "Little one," she observed with genuine concern. "I'm a nurse, you know. I used to work at Charlotte Children's Hospital, specializing in cases like, well, special cases." "You're a nurse?" Richard's interest was immediate. "And you have experience with children?" "Yes, I worked for 7 years with children in complex treatments, mainly oncological," Louisa replied, her eyes never leaving Beatrice's, who watched her with curiosity. "I took a leave when I became pregnant, but I still keep in touch with my colleagues from the hospital." Richard and Deborah exchanged glances. He contemplative, she visibly displeased. Our previous caregiver suddenly resigned, Richard explained, as Beatrice coughed weakly. And Beatrice needs someone with experience. She needs special care right now. We'll talk about this tomorrow, Deborah interrupted with a forced smile. Now, madam, you need to call a tow truck and we need to retire. It's late. Louisa nodded, but her eyes caught something on the floor near Beatrice, a dropped hospital ID card. Discreetly, she picked it up and read the doctor's name. Dr. Paul Andrews, Pediatric Oncology. She put the card in her pocket, determined to make contact as soon as possible. That night, as the storm continued to rage outside, 3 lives intertwined in a way none of them could have predicted. Upstairs, Deborah nervously rummaged through her document box, checking bank transfer papers and powers of attorney signed by Richard. In the next room, Beatrice writhed in pain she tried to hide, clutching a small time-worn teddy bear, her biological mother's last gift. And in the guest room, Louisa sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, dialing a number that wasn't for any tow truck service. The voice on the other end of the line was deep and professional. Dr. Andrews, it's Louisa Caldwell. I found one of your patients, Beatrice Maxwell. Her voice dropped to a whisper, and I think she's in danger. The next morning, the sun emerged shyly between the clouds that still hung over the Asheville Mountains. The rain had paused, but the air remained humid and fresh. Richard found Louisa on the veranda, watching the sunrise. Without preamble, he made the offer. She could stay and care for Beatrice for the remaining time. In return, she would receive a generous salary and accommodation until her baby was born. Why me? Louisa asked, surprised by the sudden offer. Because you appeared when we needed you most, Richard replied, looking at the horizon. And because I saw how you looked at my daughter. With true compassion. What Richard didn't say and what Louisa didn't reveal was that both suspected it hadn't been just coincidence that led her to that house on that specific night. There was something more, a silent mission that was beginning to take shape as the sun illuminated the green hills of the Blue Ridge mountain range. And so, Louisa accepted the job, sealing a silent pact that would forever change the destiny of that family. Meanwhile, on the other side of the house, Deborah watched the scene with calculating eyes, already planning how to get rid of this intruder before she discovered too much. What she didn't know was that it was already too late. The truth, like the rising sun, was inexorably beginning to illuminate the darkest corners of that mansion. 3 days had passed since Louisa's arrival at the Maxwell mansion. The nurse attentively observed every detail of the routine imposed on little Beatrice. The mansion, though luxurious, had a heavy atmosphere that seemed to suffocate any joy that tried to blossom. The spacious rooms, decorated with priceless artworks and exclusive designer furniture, contrasted with the simplicity of the girls' room, which looked more like a storage room for old things no one wanted. That morning, Louisa entered Beatrice's room carrying a tray with breakfast and the prescribed medicines. The girl was sitting on the bed, drawing in a worn notebook. "Good morning, little artist," Louisa greeted with a warm smile. "What are you drawing?" Beatrice looked up, still a little distrustful, but already showing more comfort with the nurse's presence than in previous days. "It's the view from my old room in Myrtle Beach," the girl replied, turning the notebook to show a colorful drawing of the sea. "We lived there before Mom left. Dad sold the house after he married Aunt Deborah." Louisa sat on the edge of the bed and placed the tray on the nightstand. Her eyes caught the various drawings scattered around the room, all depicting landscapes of beaches, boats, and the ocean. "You miss it there, don't you?" "Very much," Beatrice confessed, lowering the notebook. "The sea made me feel good. Dad promised to take me to see the sunrise on the beach one last time, but he's always busy. And Aunt Deborah says traveling is bad for my health." Louisa swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. She picked up the small cup with the medicines and noticed something strange. The capsules had a different coloration from those she had seen in the medical prescription she had discreetly photographed the day before to Beatrice. "Are these the same medicines you always take?" The girl looked at the medications and shook her head. "Aunt Deborah changed them last week. She said they were the same, just cheaper. But they make me dizzier and sometimes my heart beats very fast." An alarm sounded in Louisa's mind. As an oncology nurse, she was well aware of medication protocols for cases like Beatrice's, and she knew that any alteration without medical supervision could be catastrophic. And your father knows about this change? I don't know, Beatrice replied, shrugging. He's hardly ever home. When he is, Aunt Deborah says we can't bother him with silly little things like medicines. Louisa made an effort to keep a neutral expression, but her mind worked quickly. She took out her cell phone and discreetly photographed the medications. You know what we're going to do today? While you have your breakfast, I'll tell you a story about a girl who lived in a seaside town. How does that sound? Beatrice's eyes lit up momentarily, and Louisa realized how easy it was to bring joy to that child, something Deborah seemed determined to prevent. Later, when Beatrice finally fell asleep for a nap, Louisa took advantage of Deborah's absence, who had gone out for one of her frequent social engagements, and began to investigate. She entered Richard's office and found folders with Beatrice's medical documents. She quickly photographed everything: exams, reports, original prescriptions. She sent the images to her former colleague, Dr. Matthew Foster, a pediatric oncologist at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, with whom she maintained close contact. The response came in less than an hour, in the form of a call. Louisa, this is very serious. Matthew's voice sounded alarmed over the phone. The medications you photographed are low-quality generic versions, some even with dubious composition. By the labels, they seem to come from an unregulated pharmacy. And worse, the dosage is completely wrong. I suspected as much, Louisa replied, closing the bedroom door for privacy. The girl is showing symptoms that are inconsistent with proper treatment. Based on recent tests, her prognosis is already quite guarded, but with the correct medication, she could have quality of life in her remaining time. What's happening is criminal, Louisa. I know, she whispered, feeling the baby stir in her womb as if sharing her indignation. I need your help, Matthew. Can you send me a detailed report on what you found? And maybe contact her doctor, Dr. Paul Andrews. Consider it done. I'll also notify the medical board. But Louisa, be careful. Situations like this can be dangerous. Upon hanging up, Louisa carefully put the documents back in place and left the office. In the hallway, she almost collided with Deborah, who stared at her suspiciously. "What were you doing in my husband's office?" she asked, her falsely sweet tone barely disguising her hostility. "Sorry, I was looking for a pen. Beatrice wanted to draw and hers are almost out," Louisa improvised, maintaining her calm. Deborah analyzed her for a few seconds. "Next time, ask permission. There are things in this house that are none of your business." Her gaze dropped to Louisa's belly. "By the way, when is it due?" "In about 2 months," Louisa replied, instinctively placing her hand over her belly in a protective gesture. "And the father?" "He's no longer present." A malicious smile formed on Deborah's lips. "I see. That's why you so quickly accepted a job caring for a condemned child." Louisa felt her blood boil but maintained her composure. "I accepted because I'm a nurse and I care about Beatrice's well-being." "Well-being?" Deborah laughed humorlessly. "In a week, nothing will matter to her anymore. Don't get too attached, nurse, and remember your place in this house." With that, Deborah walked away, leaving behind a strong, expensive perfume. Louisa took a deep breath, trying to control her anger and anguish. It was then that she noticed a small figure at the top of the stairs. Beatrice, pale and with frightened eyes, had heard part of the conversation. Louisa quickly went up to her. "How much did you hear, dear? Am I really leaving in a week?" the girl asked, her voice trembling. Louisa hugged her tightly. "I don't know, my love. But I know that while I'm here, I'll do everything to make you feel loved and cared for. That I promise." That night, while Richard dined alone, Deborah had gone out again and Beatrice was too weak to come downstairs. Louisa gathered her courage to address the matter. "Mr. Maxwell, may I speak about Beatrice's medications?" Richard looked up from his plate, seeming almost surprised that someone would initiate a conversation with him. "Of course, is there a problem?" "Actually, yes. I noticed that the medicines she's taking don't match the original prescriptions. They are different versions, possibly with compromised efficacy." Richard's expression shifted from surprise to confusion. "What do you mean?" "Deborah assured me she's following all medical guidelines precisely." "I'm sorry, but that's not what's happening," Louisa stated, firm yet gentle. "As an oncology nurse, I recognize the correct medications, and these are not them." The silence that followed was tense. Richard placed his cutlery on the table, his appetite apparently lost. "Are you sure about this? Absolutely. In fact, I consulted a specialist colleague who confirmed my suspicions. I can show you the documentation. Richard ran a hand over his face, looking suddenly much older and more tired. Why would Deborah do this? It doesn't make sense. There's more, Louisa continued, determined to expose everything at once. Beatrice is being forced to do household chores despite her condition. I've found her cleaning or tidying several times when she should be resting. And there are marks on her arms that suggest mistreatment. Richard's face paled. For a moment, it seemed he would defend his wife or deny the accusations, but then his shoulders slumped in defeat. I suspected something was wrong, he confessed, his voice choked. Beatrice has changed so much in recent months. But Deborah always had explanations, and I just didn't want to face the reality. My daughter is... He couldn't finish the sentence. She needs you now more than ever, Louisa said gently, and she needs the correct treatment, even if it doesn't change the final prognosis. She deserves dignity and comfort. Richard nodded, a new determination surfacing in his eyes. Tomorrow I'll conduct a full audit of everything related to her treatment, and I'll be more present. No more trips for now. That will make all the difference, Louisa smiled, feeling a small victory. What neither of them knew was that, hidden behind the dining room door, Deborah had heard every word of the conversation. Her eyes flashed with rage as she watched her husband and the intrusive nurse. She silently went upstairs to her room and opened her laptop. On the screen, several windows showed bank transfers, overseas account statements, and a document titled Richard Maxwell's Will. No one is going to ruin my plans, she muttered to herself, typing furiously. Especially not a pregnant, sentimental little nurse. The next day, an unexpected video call interrupted breakfast, so it was Dr. Paul Andrews, Beatrice's oncologist, who seemed extremely concerned. Mr. Maxwell, we need to talk urgently about your daughter's treatment. I've received alarming information about unauthorized changes to her medication. Deborah's face contorted in an expression of momentary panic, quickly replaced by forced indignation. Who would dare interfere with her treatment? I'm following exactly what was prescribed, she protested, casting a murderous glance at Louisa, who remained silent. The doctor, however, was not intimidated. I have copies of the original prescriptions here, and photos of the medications Beatrice is currently receiving. The discrepancy is evident and extremely worrying. Richard abruptly stood up from the table, his face red with anger. I want an in-person meeting today, doctor. And I want a complete audit of all aspects of my daughter's treatment. While the couple hotly debated with the doctor, Louisa took the opportunity to take Beatrice outside to the garden. The girl, despite her weakness, smiled as she felt the sun on her face. Aunt Louisa, if I could do anything before I leave, do you know what I'd want? Do us or what, my dear? Louisa asked, sitting beside her on a wooden bench. I'd want to see the sea again, make a sandcastle, eat ice cream on the beach, and see the sunrise over the ocean like Dad promised. Louisa held the girl's small, fragile hand in hers. You know what? I'll do everything I can to make that wish come true. Inside the house, the storm was just beginning. Richard confronted Deborah with increasingly compelling evidence of her negligence and cruelty. And in her eyes something dangerous grew. The desperation of someone watching a meticulously planned scheme begin to crumble. The tension in the Maxwell mansion was palpable in the days that followed. Richard cancelled all business trips and began personally overseeing every detail of Beatrice's treatment. Dr. Paul Andrews made a home visit and was horrified by the girl's condition. Tests were redone, correct medications were urgently provided, and a complete audit of treatment expenses was initiated. Deborah tried to keep up appearances, but her nerves were frayed. Her phone calls were always made locked in her room or in the car, away from Richard's and Louisa's ears. Her behavior oscillated between false displays of affection for her stepdaughter, when Richard was around, and threatening glares when they were alone. It was a Thursday afternoon when Richard called a meeting in the mansion's library. Present were Louisa, Dr. Paul, the family lawyer, Sergio Blake, and a social worker from Child Protective Services, Marlene Hayes. I thank everyone for being here. Richard began, his expression grave. As you know, we discovered serious irregularities in Beatrice's treatment. What you don't know is that we also discovered financial irregularities. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened a folder with documents. Mr. Maxwell requested an audit of the accounts related to Beatrice's treatment fund. We discovered that approximately $2 million were diverted in the last 6 months to overseas accounts in Deborah Maxwell's name. A heavy silence fell over the room. Louisa felt a chill run down her spine. Furthermore, Sergio continued, we found documents allegedly signed by you, Mr. Maxwell, authorizing the suspension of certain treatments and the substitution of medications with cheaper alternatives. Forensic handwriting experts confirmed that these signatures were forged. And there's more, Richard said, his voice choked with emotion. My will was recently altered without my knowledge. The changes directed all my assets to Deborah in the event of my passing, completely ignoring the trust fund I had created for Beatrice and for charities. Marlene, the social worker, furiously took notes. This constitutes several crimes. Mr. Maxwell, forgery, embezzlement of funds, and the most serious negligence and mistreatment against a vulnerable child. I am aware, Richard replied, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of deep weariness. And I take my share of the blame for all this. I was so absorbed in my business, so shaken by Beatrice's diagnosis, that I allowed this to happen right under my nose. Louisa watched the scene with a broken heart. Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in just a few days. She knew that, in addition to anger at Deborah's betrayal, he now carried the overwhelming weight of guilt. What do we do now? Dr. Paul asked, breaking the tense silence. I have already taken legal action, Richard replied. Deborah will be confronted with this evidence tonight, in the presence of our lawyer. Meanwhile, Louisa, he turned to the nurse, I would like you to take Beatrice for a walk. She doesn't need to witness this. Louisa nodded, relieved to be able to protect the girl from that difficult moment. Leaving the library, she found Beatrice sitting on the stairs, hugging her worn teddy bear. How much time do I have left, Aunt Louisa? The girl asked with a maturity that broke the nurse's heart. Louisa sat beside her on the stairs. Doctors can't say for sure, dear. But it's not much, is it? Beatrice insisted. I know it's not. I feel it inside. She pointed to her own chest. Louisa put her arm around the child's fragile shoulders. What matters isn't how much time we have, but how we use that time. And I promise we'll make every day count, okay? Beatrice's eyes lit up softly. Like that list you helped me make of wishes? Exactly like the list, Louisa smiled. By the way, how about we go to the park now? Your father suggested a walk, and it's a beautiful day outside. As they left through the main door, Louisa noticed Deborah watching them from the second-floor window, her face a mask of contained fury. A shiver ran down her spine, but she maintained her composure, holding Beatrice's hand firmly as they headed to the car. Asheville City Park was quiet that afternoon. The century-old trees provided pleasant shade, and the sound of the small natural waterfall created an atmosphere of peace. Beatrice, though weak, seemed invigorated by contact with nature. Did you know that when I was little, smaller than you, my mother used to bring me to a park like this? Louisa commented, gently pushing the swing Beatrice was sitting on. Is your mother far away now like mine? The girl asked. Louisa hesitated for a moment. Yes, she passed away a few years ago, but she left many good memories, just as I'm sure your mother did too. I hardly remember her, Beatrice confessed. I only remember the smell of her perfume, and how she sang to me to sleep. Dad doesn't like to talk about her. He says it hurts too much. Sometimes when we love someone very much, the longing can hurt, Louisa explained softly. But that doesn't mean we should stop talking about that person, or remembering the happy moments. Beatrice was silent for a few moments, swinging gently. Aunt Louisa, if I leave like Mom did, will you remember me? The question hit Louisa like a punch. She stopped the swing and knelt in front of the girl, ignoring the back pain due to her advanced state of pregnancy. Beatrice, look at me, she asked, holding the child's small hands. I will never ever forget you. You are a special, brave, and enlightened girl. Meeting you changed my life, you know? The girl's eyes filled with tears. Really? The purest truth. And you know what? As long as people live in our hearts and memories, they never truly leave. Beatrice leaned forward and hugged Louisa with all the strength her fragile little body allowed. They stayed like that for long minutes, time seeming to suspend around them. On the way back to the mansion, Louisa noticed that Beatrice seemed more tired than usual. The nurse in her immediately took over. "Are you feeling well, dear?" "Just a little dizzy," the girl admitted, resting her head against the car seat. Louisa quickly checked Beatrice's vital signs and didn't like what she found. Her pulse was fast and irregular, her breathing a little labored. She immediately called Dr. Paul. "We need to take her to the hospital," was the doctor's immediate instruction. "The damage caused by the incorrect medication may have accelerated the process. I'll meet you in the emergency room." With a racing heart, Louisa changed route to Asheville Regional Hospital, the best in the area. While driving, she tried to keep Beatrice conscious and calm. "Let's play a game, Bea," she proposed, using the affectionate nickname she had created for the girl. "I'll start a story and you continue, okay?" The girl nodded weakly, and so they spent the journey to the hospital, together creating a story about a princess who lived in a castle by the sea and had a magical dolphin as her best friend. At the hospital, Beatrice was immediately taken to the emergency room. Richard arrived shortly after, his face pale with worry. Seeing Louisa in the waiting room, he rushed to her. "What happened?" "She was fine when you left." "She had a decompensation," Louisa explained, trying to maintain professional calm, though she was devastated inside. "Dr. Paul thinks it might be a consequence of the inadequate medications she had been receiving." Richard slumped into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "I can't believe I allowed this to happen. My daughter, my only daughter." Louisa sat beside him and, after a moment's hesitation, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Richard, don't blame yourself. You're doing everything you can now. That's what matters. You don't understand." He lifted his face, his eyes red with suppressed tears. "Beatrice is all I have left of Caroline, my wife. When she was diagnosed with the same disease that now afflicts our daughter, I promised I would always protect our girl. And look how I failed." "You didn't fail," Louisa insisted with gentle firmness. "You were deceived by someone who exploited your pain and vulnerability. And now you're fighting with all your might to correct it." Richard looked at Louisa with new eyes, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "How can you be so strong, pregnant, alone, and yet able to care for others' problems with such compassion?" Louisa smiled sadly. "Life taught me to be strong. When my husband abandoned us upon discovering the pregnancy, I thought I couldn't go on. But every morning the sun rose again and I realized I had a choice. Give up or continue. I chose to continue." Before Richard could respond, Dr. Paul appeared in the hallway. Both stood up immediately. "We managed to stabilize her," the doctor informed them. "But I won't lie, the situation is delicate. Ideally, we should transfer her to Atlanta, where we have more advanced resources, but I don't know if she would withstand the journey right now." "Do whatever is best for her, doctor," Richard pleaded. "Money is not an issue. If you need to bring in specialists, equipment, whatever is necessary. First, let's see how she responds in the next 24 hours, the doctor replied. "We've already administered the correct medications and are monitoring her closely. You can see her now, but briefly. She needs to rest." In the hospital room, Beatrice seemed even smaller and more fragile, connected to monitors and with an oxygen mask. Seeing her father and Louisa, her eyes opened slightly. "Daddy," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible. Richard approached and held his daughter's tiny hand carefully, as if she were made of the most delicate crystal. "I'm here, my love. Daddy is here and won't leave your side anymore." "Is Aunt Deborah mad at me?" the girl asked with visible apprehension. "Don't worry about her," Richard replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Louisa. "She won't bother you anymore." "Never again." A small smile appeared on Beatrice's face before her eyes closed again, overcome by tiredness and medication. Leaving the room, Richard pulled Louisa to a discreet corner of the hallway. "I need to tell you what happened with Deborah." "Was she arrested?" Louisa whispered, concerned. "Not exactly. When confronted with the evidence, she lost control. She threatened me, you, the lawyers. When she realized she had no way out, she tried to flee. The security guard stopped her, and she is now under psychiatric supervision at Highland Psychiatric Hospital in Charleston, South Carolina. The police are on standby for when she is discharged." Louisa exhaled, realizing she hadn't even noticed she was holding her breath. "That's a relief, I suppose." "Yes and no," Richard replied, running a hand through his graying hair. "During her outburst, Deborah revealed things. Disturbing things. It seems she always resented Beatrice, seeing her as an obstacle to full access to my fortune. The plan was, well, to hasten the inevitable with Beatrice. And then he couldn't complete the sentence. "My God," Louisa murmured, horrified by the implication. "I can't believe I was so blind," Richard continued, his voice choked. "So absorbed in my own grief and my business that I didn't see the snake I brought into my own home near my daughter." Louisa didn't know what to say. The whole situation was so tragic, so unfair, especially for Beatrice, who was already facing such a difficult battle against her illness. "What do we do now?" she finally asked. The use of the first-person plural did not go unnoticed by Richard, who looked at Louisa with gratitude. "Now we will do what should have been done from the beginning. We will give Beatrice the best possible days, fulfill her dreams, make her feel loved and protected for the time we have left." That night, while Beatrice slept in the hospital under the effect of sedatives, Richard and Louisa remained by her bed, talking in low voices about plans to fulfill the little girl's wishes. Outside the window, the full moon bathed the hospital gardens with its silver light, like a silent premonition that despite the darkness, there is always light to be found. And in the psychiatric ward of a distant hospital, Deborah stared at the ceiling of her isolated room, her eyes empty of any emotion, except the cold hatred she now directed not only at Beatrice, but also at the nurse who had ruined her meticulously planned schemes. In her disturbed mind, she was already beginning to formulate her revenge. 3 days had passed since Beatrice's hospitalization. The doctors managed to stabilize her condition enough for her to return home. But the prognosis remained guarded. Dr. Paul was clear. The damage caused by the inadequate medication and mistreatment had accelerated the progression of the disease. The time they had left with the girl had drastically reduced. "How much time, doctor?" Richard asked, as they watched Beatrice sleeping in her hospital room prepared for discharge. Dr. Paul sighed, the weight of decades of medical experience on his shoulders. "It's difficult to say precisely, Mr. Maxwell. Perhaps a few days, a week at most. The important thing now is to ensure she doesn't feel pain and can enjoy this time with quality." Louisa, who had been silently following the conversation, felt her heart ache. In such a short time, Beatrice had become special to her in a way she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was seeing in the girl the child she would soon hold in her arms. Perhaps because of Beatrice's purity and strength, despite everything she had suffered. "She has a small list," Louisa commented, attracting the attention of both men. "Things she'd like to do. They're simple wishes. See the sea again, eat ice cream on the beach, bake cookies, watch the sunrise." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Caroline and I promised to take her to see the sunrise in Myrtle Beach, on the same beach where we met. We never kept that promise." Dr. Paul reflected for a moment. "From a medical point of view, a car trip to Myrtle Beach would be risky, but not impossible. With proper care and frequent stops for rest, it might be feasible. Beatrice will need supplemental oxygen and constant monitoring, but—" He looked at Louisa. "With a specialized nurse like you, it would be possible to organize that structure." A spark of hope appeared in Richard's eyes. "Would you do it, Louisa? Would you accompany us to Myrtle Beach to fulfill Beatrice's dream?" Before Louisa could answer, a weak voice sounded from the bed. "Are we really going to the beach, Daddy?" Beatrice had woken up and heard part of the conversation. Her eyes, previously dull from suffering, now shone with a joy she hadn't shown in a long time. "If the doctors allow it, and you feel strong enough—" "Yes, Princess, we're going to the beach," Richard replied, approaching his daughter and adjusting a lock of her hair. "And Aunt Louisa is coming too?" the girl asked, looking hopefully at the nurse. Louisa smiled, feeling the baby stir in her belly, as if it also wanted to participate in that trip. "Of course I am, Bea. Someone needs to make sure you and your dad don't eat too much ice cream, right?" Beatrice's weak but genuine laugh was like music to everyone's ears in the room. Dr. Paul gave a few more recommendations, prescribed pain medication, and promised to arrange for an ambulance with emergency equipment to accompany them at a distance during the trip, should it be necessary. That same afternoon, Beatrice was discharged from the hospital. While the girl rested in her room at the mansion, Richard and Louisa worked on preparations for the trip to Myrtle Beach. They decided to leave early the next morning, to avoid the intense midday heat and allow frequent stops for Beatrice's comfort. "Are you sure you're willing to do this?" Richard asked Louisa, as they checked the list of necessary medical supplies. "I know it's not easy for you in your condition." Louisa caressed her almost 8-month pregnant belly. I'm absolutely sure. Besides, my doctor says the baby will still wait a few weeks. And Beatrice? Well, she can't wait. Richard was silent for a moment, watching the woman in front of him with growing admiration. In such a short time, Louisa had become essential in their lives in a way he had never imagined possible. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice choked with emotion. "For everything you've done for Beatrice, for us." Louisa felt her face blush slightly. "There's no need to thank me. It's my job, and besides, Beatrice won my heart from day one." "It's not just work," Richard insisted, his eyes fixed on hers. "You could have simply reported the mistreatment and moved on. You could have taken another less complicated job. But you stayed. You fought for her as if she were your own daughter." Louisa didn't know how to respond. It was true that her involvement with the case had gone far beyond the professional, but there was something about that broken family that touched her deeply. Perhaps it was seeing in Richard and Beatrice reflections of her own losses and fears, her husband's abandonment upon discovering the pregnancy, the fear of raising a child alone, the longing for the mother she had lost a few years ago. "We need to focus on what matters now," she finally said, changing the subject, making these days special for her. The next morning, well before sunrise, the Maxwell mansion was bustling with activity. A specially adapted van with medical equipment was parked at the main entrance. Richard supervised the loading of suitcases, while Louisa checked the medical supplies and helped Beatrice get dressed. "I'm so excited. Aunt Louisa," the girl confessed as the nurse combed her thinning hair. The incorrect chemotherapy had caused significant hair loss, but there were still enough strands to tie with colorful bows. "I'm going to show you and the baby the most beautiful beach in the world." Louisa smiled, touched by how Beatrice always included the baby in her plans, as if she already considered it part of the family. "I'm sure he or she will love it," she replied, giving a final touch to the hairstyle. "Ready for the adventure?" Beatrice's eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. "Ready as can be." The trip from Asheville to Myrtle Beach would normally take about 3 hours, but with frequent stops for Beatrice's comfort and rest, it took almost twice as long. However, no one seemed to mind the slow pace. The gradually changing landscape, from the green mountains of the Blue Ridge to the plains and finally to the coast, served as a distraction and a topic for lively conversations. During the journey, Richard told stories about how he had met Caroline, Beatrice's mother, on those same beaches 20 years ago. She was an oceanography student, and he was a young, rising businessman vacationing on the South Carolina coast. "Your mother was doing a study on dolphins," Richard explained to Beatrice, who listened fascinated. "I saw her from the beach in a small boat, with equipment and clipboards. I was so curious that I swam out to find out what she was doing." "And was she mad?" Beatrice asked, laughing as she imagined the scene. "Furious," Richard confirmed, laughing too. "She said I was scaring the dolphins and disrupting years of research. But later, when we returned to the beach, she agreed to have coffee with me to apologize for the lecture. The rest, as they say, is history." Louisa watched father and daughter with a discreet smile. It was visible how Richard transformed when he spoke of Caroline. His eyes gained a special sparkle. His posture became more relaxed. It was as if, for a few moments, the weight of the world lifted from his shoulders. When they finally arrived in Myrtle Beach, the afternoon sun was already beginning to set. Richard had rented an isolated beach house with direct access to the sand, adapted for people with reduced mobility. The residence was spacious and airy, with large windows that offered panoramic views of the ocean. "Is this where we're staying?" Beatrice asked, amazed as Richard carried her into the house. "Yes, Princess." "Do you like it?" "It's perfect. It looks like a princess castle by the sea, just like in my drawings." The medical team accompanying them, an ambulance with paramedics who would take turns following Dr. Paul's instructions, parked discreetly a few yards from the house. Richard had arranged accommodation for them in a nearby inn, ensuring they would always be on standby if needed. After settling in and allowing Beatrice to rest a little, they decided to take a short walk on the beach before dinner. Richard carried his daughter to the sand, where a special adapted chair awaited them. Louisa followed, carrying the portable oxygen equipment and constantly monitoring the girl's vital signs. The sun was already approaching the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The sea breeze was soft and refreshing, bringing the characteristic smell of salt and algae. Beatrice took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment to savor the sensation. "It's exactly as I remembered," she whispered, opening her eyes again to contemplate the ocean. "Only even more beautiful." Richard knelt beside his daughter's chair, picking up a handful of sand and letting it trickle through his fingers. "Your mother used to say this beach has the softest sand in the south. She knew beaches all over the world because of her research, but she always came back here." "Can I feel it too?" Beatrice asked, extending her small hands. Louisa helped her lean forward a little, while Richard placed a small mound of sand in her palms. Beatrice smiled, feeling the fine, warm texture. "It's like sugar," she exclaimed, delighted. "Can we make a sandcastle, Daddy? Like we used to?" Richard looked hesitantly at Louisa, who nodded encouragingly. "Of course we can be, but just a small one, okay? You need to save energy for tomorrow when we'll see the sunrise." Over the next hour, the three dedicated themselves to building a modest sandcastle. Beatrice directed the operations, indicating where each tower and moat should go, while Richard and Louisa did the physical work. In the end, the result was an impressive fortress, decorated with seashells they found on the beach. "Only one thing is missing," Beatrice declared, critically looking at their work. "A flag on top of the main tower." Louisa had an idea. She took a colorful scarf from her bag and tied it to a thin stick. "How about this?" Beatrice's eyes sparkled with approval as Richard planted the improvised flag on top of the tallest tower. "Now it's perfect. It's the royal castle of Myrtle Beach." As the sun began to set on the horizon, Louisa noticed that Beatrice seemed more tired than usual, though she tried to hide it. "I think it's time to go back to the house, prepare a nice dinner, and rest so we can wake up early tomorrow. What do you think?" Richard agreed, also noticing his daughter's signs of fatigue. "You're right. And besides, we need to try that famous ice cream on the boardwalk, don't we, Bea?" The mention of ice cream instantly revived Beatrice. "Can we really eat ice cream before dinner?" "Today we can do anything you want," Richard replied, smiling as he picked her up in his arms. On the way back to the house, they stopped at a traditional seaside ice cream parlor. Beatrice chose chocolate ice cream with caramel sauce. Richard opted for vanilla with strawberry pieces. And Louisa, after much insistence from Beatrice, accepted a pistachio cone. "Will the baby like pistachio, Aunt Louisa?" the girl asked as they enjoyed their ice cream sitting on a bench overlooking the ocean. Louisa smiled, stroking her belly. "I don't know, dear, but he or she is certainly enjoying being here with you. When he's born, will you bring him here too? To see our castle?" The innocent question brought a lump to Louisa's throat. She exchanged a quick glance with Richard, who also seemed emotional. "Of course, Bea," she finally replied, her voice slightly choked. "And I'll tell him about the brave princess who showed us how to make the best sandcastle in the world." Satisfied with the answer, Beatrice turned her attention back to the ice cream. Without noticing the tears Louisa discreetly wiped away. Back at the house, they had a light meal prepared by a local cook Richard had hired. Afterward, they settled Beatrice comfortably on the veranda, where they could continue to enjoy the view of the sea under the starry sky. Richard brought soft blankets and Louisa made sure the oxygen equipment was working properly. "Daddy, tell me more stories about Mom," Beatrice asked, as she snuggled among the pillows. Richard hesitated for a moment. Talking about Caroline had always been difficult for him, especially after discovering that Beatrice suffered from the same rare disease that had taken his wife. But now, in that place so full of her memories, the words seemed to flow naturally. "Your mother loved to tell stories about the constellations," he began, pointing to the starry sky. "She said that every star had a story, and that when we look at the sky, we are connecting with millions of years of human stories." Beatrice followed her father's gaze, contemplating the blanket of stars above them. What was her favorite constellation? "Orion the Hunter," Richard replied, pointing to a specific cluster of stars. "See those 3 stars aligned? That's Orion's belt. Your mother said they guided her whenever she felt lost." The conversation continued, filled with stories about Caroline, how she studied dolphins, how excited she got when she discovered a new marine species, how she sang to Beatrice even in the womb. Gradually, Richard's voice grew softer, realizing that his daughter had fallen asleep, a small smile on her lips. "You're amazing with her," Louisa commented, after helping transfer Beatrice to bed. She adores you. Richard sat heavily in an armchair in the room, watching his daughter sleep. For a long time I was paralyzed by the fear of losing her as I lost Caroline. I ended up distancing myself when she needed me most. You're here now, Louisa reminded him, sitting in a nearby chair. That's what matters. Thanks to you, he replied, looking at her with gratitude. If you hadn't shown up on that stormy night. Destiny, perhaps, Louisa suggested with a small smile. Or angels, Richard completed, looking back at his daughter. Caroline always believed in angels. They remained silent for a few minutes, the only sound being Beatrice's soft breathing and the distant murmur of waves breaking on the beach. You should rest, Louisa finally suggested, noticing the tiredness on Richard's face. We need to wake up before dawn to take Beatrice to the beach. Richard nodded, though he seemed reluctant to leave the room. And you? You also need to rest in your condition. I'll be fine. I promise to wake you if there's any change. When Richard finally retired to his room, Louisa settled into the armchair beside Beatrice's bed. From her bag, she took out a small notebook where she had begun to record events since she arrived at the Maxwell mansion. It wasn't just a personal diary. It was also a detailed record of the mistreatment Beatrice had suffered, the incorrect medications, the evidence of negligence. As she wrote by the soft light of the bedside lamp, Louisa occasionally looked up to check on Beatrice. The girl slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling at a constant, though faster than normal, rhythm. On her pale face a slight smile remained, as if in her dreams she was reliving the joys of that day. We'll make every moment special for you, little one, Louisa whispered, putting away the notebook. It's a promise. Outside, the sea continued its eternal ebb and flow, the waves whispering ancient secrets. And hundreds of miles away, in a psychiatric hospital in Charleston, South Carolina, Deborah plotted her return, fueled by hatred and a desire for revenge. What no one yet knew was that she had managed to make an unauthorized call, contacting an old ally who was now heading to Myrtle Beach with precise instructions. The early morning still reigned over Myrtle Beach when Louisa woke with a start. She had dozed off in the armchair beside Beatrice's bed, and something had awakened her, perhaps a dream, perhaps a premonition. She immediately checked the girl's vital signs and was relieved to find that she was sleeping peacefully. The clock showed 4:15 a.m. There was just over an hour until sunrise, the moment they had planned so much for. Louisa carefully got up, stretching her back sore from the uncomfortable position, and went to the window. The sky was still dark, but it was already showing the first signs of the approaching dawn, a faint lightening on the horizon, where the sea met the firmament. She decided to check the preparations while Beatrice was still sleeping. In the kitchen she found Richard already awake, making coffee. I couldn't sleep, he explained, noticing the surprise on Louisa's face. I'm anxious for this moment. I want it to be perfect for her. Louisa smiled, understanding. It will be perfect. Just the fact that you two are here together already makes everything special. Richard offered Louisa a cup of coffee, which she thanked for, but refused. I need to limit caffeine because of the baby, she explained, opting for a glass of water. How are you feeling? He asked, his eyes scanning the nurse's prominent belly. Isn't all this effort too tiring for you in your condition? I'm fine, Louisa assured him, though she felt the tiredness in her bones. And it's worth every moment. Seeing Beatrice's smile yesterday on the beach, it's priceless. Richard nodded, moved. You're right. Yesterday when we were building that sandcastle, I realized how much time I lost. How many moments like that I let pass because I was always busy with work, or... He hesitated, the pain evident in his eyes. Or avoiding facing the fact that my daughter is sick, just like Caroline was. Louisa felt the impulse to touch his arm, a simple gesture of comfort, but she restrained herself. The line between professional and personal was becoming increasingly blurred, and she needed to maintain some distance, however difficult it was. It's natural to want to protect our hearts from pain, she said softly. But sometimes in trying to avoid suffering, we end up losing moments of joy as well. Richard looked at her with a new intensity. How can you be so wise at such a young age? Before Louisa could answer, a soft voice interrupted them. Daddy, Aunt Louisa? First shall I... Beatrice was standing at the kitchen door, still in her pajamas, holding her worn teddy bear. Despite her paleness and dark circles under her eyes sparkled with anticipation. "Good morning, Princess." Richard hurried to his daughter, picking her up. "What are you doing up so early?" "We were going to wake you in a little while." "I couldn't sleep anymore," she replied with a shy smile. "I was afraid of missing the sunrise." Louisa approached, discreetly checking the girl's condition. "How are you feeling, Bea? Did you rest well?" Beatrice nodded. "I dreamed of dolphins, Aunt Louisa. They were swimming with me and Mom." Richard and Louisa exchanged an emotional glance. Dreams of her mother had become more frequent in recent days, as if Caroline were somehow preparing her daughter for the reunion that was approaching. It was an idea simultaneously comforting and devastating. "What a beautiful dream, my love," Richard replied, kissing the top of his daughter's head. "How about we get ready to watch the sunrise? Aunt Louisa will help you get dressed, while I make some hot chocolate for us to take to the beach. What do you think?" Beatrice's face lit up with the proposal. "Can I wear the blue dress Mom gave me? The one with embroidered seashells?" Richard was surprised. "You still have that dress?" "I thought it wouldn't fit anymore." "I saved it," Beatrice explained. "It's small, but I wanted to wear it today, can I?" "Of course you can," Louisa intervened, noticing the emotion that overwhelmed Richard. "Let's see if we can adjust it to be comfortable." While Richard prepared the hot chocolate and arranged a basket with cookies and fruits, Louisa helped Beatrice get dressed. The light blue dress with small embroidered seashells was indeed small for the girl. But with a few strategic adjustments, folding the sleeves and wearing it as a tunic over white leggings, they achieved a charming and comfortable look. "You look beautiful," Louisa praised, arranging Beatrice's thin hair with a delicate blue bow. "You look like a true mermaid." Beatrice smiled at her reflection in the mirror. For a moment, the illness seemed to disappear from her face, replaced by the pure joy of a child about to fulfill a dream. "Will Mom like to see me like this?" she asked, with an innocence that broke Louisa's heart. "I'm sure she will, my love." "I'm sure she will." At 5 a.m. everything was ready. Richard had arranged a kind of adapted mobile bed, similar to a comfortable stretcher, where Beatrice could lie down while they watched the sunrise on the beach. Louisa checked all the necessary medical equipment, ensuring that the portable oxygen was working perfectly and that emergency medications were within reach. One of the paramedics from the support team, Henry, insisted on accompanying them to the beach, keeping a discreet distance so as not to interfere with the family moment, but close enough to help if necessary. "Is everything really okay?" Richard asked Louisa, as they walked across the soft sand towards the perfect spot to observe the sunrise. He carried Beatrice in his arms, while Louisa carried the medical equipment and Henry helped with the mobile bed. "Everything is under control," Louisa assured him, though she noticed that Beatrice's breathing was a little more labored than usual. "She's excited. That makes her heart beat faster." "It's normal." They found a perfect spot, a small sandy promontory that offered a privileged view of the maritime horizon. Henry helped set up the mobile bed, and Richard comfortably settled Beatrice, wrapping her in soft blankets to protect her from the morning breeze. Louisa adjusted the oxygen flow and checked the girl's vital signs once more, trying to conceal her concern about the increased heart rate. "Is everything all right?" Richard whispered, noticing the nurse's concentrated expression. "For now, yes," Louisa replied in the same tone, "but we need to monitor constantly. Let me know if you notice any change in her behavior." Richard nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation despite the apparent tranquility of the moment. He sat beside his daughter on the sand, while Louisa positioned herself on the other side, both forming a protective barrier around the little girl. "Look, Daddy," Beatrice exclaimed, pointing to the horizon. "It's starting!" The sky began to change, the deep black giving way to shades of dark blue, then purple and violet. The fainter stars gradually disappeared, while the brighter ones resisted, witnessing the transition between night and day. "It's even more beautiful than I remembered," Beatrice whispered, her eyes reflecting the changing colors of the sky. Richard held his daughter's hand tenderly. "Your mother and I used to watch the sunrise on this same beach. She said it was the moment when the sky and the sea talked in secret, exchanging stories they had collected during the night." Beatrice smiled at the image. "And what are they talking about now?" Richard looked at the horizon, where a golden line was beginning to appear. "Today, I think they're talking about a very brave princess who came to visit the kingdom of the oceans. The girl laughed, delighted with the improvised story. And what else? They're commenting on how this princess has a smile that shines brighter than the sun itself, and how she's loved by everyone in the kingdom of the land and the kingdom of the sea. Silent tears streamed down Richard's face as he continued to invent the story, each word laden with love and disguised farewell. Louisa watched the scene with a heavy heart, fighting back her own tears. The sun began to rise on the horizon, a perfect semicircle of liquid fire emerging from the waters. The first golden rays stretched over the sea, creating a shimmering path that seemed to lead directly to them. "It's like a carpet of gold," Beatrice murmured, marveling. "As if the sun were inviting us to visit it." "It's exactly that," Richard agreed, his voice choked. "It's an invitation." For a few minutes they stood in reverent silence, absorbing the majesty of the natural spectacle. The sun continued its ascent, tinging the sky with gold, orange, and red, while the sea reflected all that glory in millions of shimmering fragments. "Is Mom seeing this too?" Beatrice asked suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. Richard hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm sure she is, my love. Somehow she's here with us." Beatrice smiled, satisfied with the answer. Then, unexpectedly, she pointed to the horizon. "Look, they're dolphins." Louisa and Richard followed the girl's gaze. Indeed, about 100 yards from the beach, a small group of dolphins gracefully leaped over the waves, their glistening bodies catching the light of the rising sun. "Incredible," Louisa exclaimed, genuinely surprised by the coincidence. "It's not a coincidence," Richard said with an emotional smile. "Caroline always said that dolphins appear when we need a sign of hope. She studied them for years and believed they had a special connection with humans." The three watched fascinated as the dolphins played in the waves for a few minutes, until they gradually moved away, disappearing into the illuminated horizon. Beatrice waved to them, as if saying goodbye to old friends. "This was the most perfect day of my life," the girl declared, leaning back against the pillows, visibly tired, but with her eyes still bright with joy. Louisa noticed that Beatrice's breathing was more labored, and her lips had a slight bluish tint, a sign of insufficient oxygenation. Discreetly, she increased the oxygen flow and signaled to Henry, who immediately approached. "I think we need to go back to the house now," Louisa suggested, trying to keep her tone light. "How about we have that hot chocolate your dad made? It must be delicious." Beatrice nodded without protesting, another sign that her body was exhausted. Richard noticed the change, and with a nod of understanding to Louisa, gently picked his daughter up in his arms. "Come on, princess. We have more special things planned for today." On the way back to the house, Louisa kept a close eye on Beatrice's vital signs. The situation was controlled but precarious. The morning's effort, though emotionally valuable, had taken its toll on the girl's fragile body. Once in the house, they settled Beatrice on the veranda sofa, from where she could still contemplate the sea, now completely bathed in sunlight. Richard served the hot chocolate, while Louisa discreetly administered a dose of painkiller to alleviate the discomfort she perceived in the girl's occasional expressions of pain. "You know what I want to do now?" Beatrice asked after taking a few sips of the warm drink. "What, my dear?" Richard replied, sitting beside her. "Bake cookies. Those with chocolate chips that Mom used to make. Do you remember the recipe, Daddy?" Richard seemed momentarily lost. Clearly he didn't remember the specific recipe, and his daughter's request caught him off guard. "I know how to make chocolate cookies," Louisa offered, coming to his rescue. "My mother taught me a special recipe. I don't know if it's exactly like your mother's, but we can try together. What do you think?" Beatrice's face lit up again. "Can we really?" "Of course. We just need to check if we have all the ingredients." Richard stood up, grateful for Louisa's intervention. "I'll check the kitchen. And if anything's missing, I can quickly go to the market." As he walked away, Louisa sat closer to Beatrice. "How are you feeling, truly?" The girl hesitated, her smile faltering a little. "Tired, and it hurts a little here," she pointed to her abdomen. "But I don't want to sleep yet. I want to enjoy every minute." Louisa felt a lump in her throat. The wisdom of that 7-year-old child was disconcerting. Beatrice seemed to understand, on some level, that her time was rapidly running out. "Let's make those cookies. Then," Louisa promised, holding the small, fragile hand in hers. "The best cookies you've ever tasted." Richard returned with good news. The hired cook had stocked the pantry with all the basic ingredients, including chocolate and vanilla. Only baking powder was missing, which he promptly offered to fetch quickly from the nearest market. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. "Tops," he assured, kissing his daughter's forehead before leaving. As soon as Richard left, Louisa helped Beatrice settle into the kitchen, setting up the oxygen equipment so it wouldn't get in the way, but would maintain the necessary support. The girl insisted on participating actively, even if her strength allowed only small contributions, mixing a few ingredients, adding chocolate chips, shaping some cookies. "When the baby is born, will you make these cookies for him too?" Beatrice asked, as she watched Louisa arrange the first batch on the baking sheet. "Absolutely," Louisa smiled, touched by the girl's constant concern for her unborn baby. "And I'll tell him I learned the recipe from a specialist chef named Beatrice." The girl laughed, delighted with the idea. Then her expression grew more serious. "Aunt Louisa, do you think my father will be very sad when I'm gone?" The question hit Louisa like a punch to the stomach. For a moment, she didn't know what to answer, torn between the honesty Beatrice deserved and the desire to protect her. "Your father loves you more than anything in the world," she finally replied. "He will miss you very much, yes. But he will also cherish forever all the special moments you shared, like this sunrise today, these cookies we're making. Will you take care of him for me?" The question was so direct, so adult, that Louisa was momentarily speechless. "When I'm not here anymore. He'll need someone. Beatrice, please. I know you like him too. I see how you look at each other." Louisa felt her face flush intensely. It was true that a connection had formed between her and Richard in recent days, something born of shared adversity, mutual suffering, the joint struggle to give Beatrice the best possible end. But to admit deeper feelings, "Your father is very strong," Louisa deflected, placing the baking sheet in the oven, "and he has many people who care about him. But no one like you," Beatrice insisted, with the characteristic stubbornness of children. "You saved us. Like an angel." Before Louisa could respond, they heard the sound of a car parking. "That must be your father coming back," she said, relieved by the interruption of the uncomfortable conversation. "Let's finish these cookies to surprise him." But when she looked out the kitchen window, she didn't see Richard's car, but an unknown vehicle, black and with tinted windows. A man in a suit got out and looked around, as if trying to confirm the address. An alarm sounded in Louisa's mind. There was something familiar yet threatening about that figure. The man picked up his phone, apparently making a call as he walked towards the house. "Beatrice, dear," Louisa said, trying to keep her voice calm, "let's go to your room for a moment. I think we need to give you some medicine before the cookies are ready." "But I want to see them grow in the oven," the girl protested. "It'll be quick, I promise. And then we'll come back to see the cookies." Louisa helped Beatrice get up, disconnected the oxygen tube for a moment to facilitate movement, and began to guide her out of the kitchen. However, before they could leave, the doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking on the door. "Miss Caldwell?" "I know you're in there. I need to speak with you urgently," a male voice called from the other side. Louisa felt her blood run cold. How did that man know her name? And what did he want? A terrible thought crossed her mind. Could it be someone sent by Deborah? "Aunt Louisa?" "Who is it?" Beatrice asked, clinging to the nurse's hand, sensing her tension. "I don't know, dear. But let's go to your room while I find out, okay?" The knocking on the door became more insistent. "It's about Deborah Maxwell. She escaped from the psychiatric hospital last night. Police believe she may be heading here." The revelation left Louisa paralyzed for a moment. Deborah, a fugitive, heading to Myrtle Beach? A shiver ran down her spine at the thought of what that woman would be capable of doing, driven by a desire for revenge. "Who are you?" Louisa asked through the closed door, keeping Beatrice protected behind her. "My name is Andrew Smith, a private investigator hired by Mr. Richard Maxwell," the man replied. "I have identification and can show it. Mr. Maxwell asked me to monitor Deborah's movements while you were here." Louisa still hesitated. Beatrice held her hand tightly, looking anxiously at the door. "Aunt Louisa, I'm scared," the girl whispered. At that moment, Louisa's phone rang. It was Richard. "Louisa, an investigator named Andrew is coming to the house," he said quickly. "I forgot to tell you about him. He's trustworthy. I hired him when we learned of Deborah's suspicious activities. He has important information." "He's already here," Louisa replied, feeling a momentary relief. "He just arrived with news about Deborah." "She escaped, Richard." There was a moment of tense silence on the other end of the line. "I'm coming back right now." "Let Andrew in and follow the security protocol we discussed. You and Beatrice go to the panic room in the attic. The password is Beatrice's birthday. Andrew knows what to do." Louisa hung up and approached the door, still cautious. "I'll open it, but I want to see your identification through the window first." After verifying the investigator's identity, a man around 40, with graying hair and a military bearing, Louisa finally opened the door. "Thank you." "Ms. Caldwell," Andrew said, quickly stepping inside. "We have little time. Deborah was seen in Wilmington, North Carolina, approximately an hour ago. She managed to trick the doctors by faking an emergency, assaulted a security guard, and stole a car." "My God," Louisa murmured, hugging Beatrice protectively. "What does she want?" Andrew looked at the girl and then back at Louisa, silently indicating that he preferred not to speak openly in front of the child. "Beatrice, dear," Louisa said, kneeling down to the girl's level. "We need to go to a special place in the house for a little while, okay? Like a game of hide-and-seek." "Is it because of Aunt Deborah?" Beatrice asked, her big eyes reflecting an understanding beyond her age. "Is she coming to hurt us?" Louisa exchanged a quick glance with Andrew, who nodded slightly. "We're just going to protect ourselves, just in case," she replied sincerely. "Your father is already on his way back, and Mr. Andrew is here to help us. Everything will be fine." As she guided Beatrice down the hallway towards the stairs leading to the attic, Louisa explained to Andrew about the girl's health condition and the need for the portable oxygen equipment. "I'll get what's necessary from her room," the investigator said. "You two go upstairs and I'll bring everything you need." On the way to the attic, Beatrice began to show signs of fatigue. Her breathing became more labored, and a slight tremor ran through her body. "I'm getting tired, Aunt Louisa," she murmured. "I know, my dear. We'll rest as soon as we get upstairs. I promise." The house's attic had been converted into a modern panic room, a security measure Richard had installed in all his properties after some attempted kidnapping incidents years ago, when his company began to gain national prominence. The space was surprisingly comfortable, with a small living room, a full bathroom, and even a mini kitchen. The windows were bulletproof, and the access door was reinforced with steel. Louisa typed the password, ear for part 15 to 17, Beatrice's birthday, and the door opened with a soft click. Inside, automatic lights came on, revealing the cozy environment, designed not to look like a bunker despite its function. "Wow," Beatrice exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her tiredness and fear. "It's like a secret apartment. Daddy never showed me this place." "It's our special hideout for now," Louisa smiled, helping the girl settle on the sofa. "We'll stay here until your father comes back, okay?" A few minutes later, Andrew arrived with the oxygen equipment, Beatrice's medications, some bottles of water, and the cell phones they had left in the kitchen. He also brought the baking sheet with the cookies, which were already ready. "I thought this might help keep spirits high," he said, winking at Beatrice as he placed the baking sheet on the table. "Our cookies!" the girl exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "Thank you, Uncle Andrew." The investigator smiled briefly, before turning his attention back to Louisa. "I'll check the perimeter and wait for Mr. Maxwell. The door only opens from the inside or with the password, so you're safe here. There's a communication system there." He pointed to an intercom on the wall. "In case you need anything, keep your phone close by too." After Andrew left, Louisa quickly set up the oxygen equipment for Beatrice and checked her vital signs. Her heart rate was elevated, probably due to the stress of the situation, and oxygenation was not ideal. "Aunt Louisa, Aunt Deborah wants to hurt me, doesn't she?" Beatrice asked directly, as she bit into a still warm cookie. Louisa hesitated, torn between protecting the girl from the frightening truth and being honest with her. "Aunt Deborah is confused and angry," she finally replied. "She did things she shouldn't have done, and now she's scared of the consequences. People like that sometimes make wrong decisions, like when she hid my medicines, or when she made me clean the floor even when I was very tired." The simplicity with which Beatrice described the abuses she suffered broke Louisa's heart. How could a child normalize such cruelty? Yes, dear. That was wrong, and you never deserve to be treated that way. No child does. Beatrice was silent for a moment, thoughtfully chewing her cookie. These cookies are almost as good as Mom's, she finally commented with a small smile. They just needed that special white powder she put on top. Confectioner's sugar, Louisa guessed, returning the smile. Next time we'll remember to put it on. The mention of next time hung in the air like a fragile promise that both knew was uncertain. Louisa's phone vibrated. A message from Richard informing her that he was 10 minutes from the house, stuck in traffic caused by police checkpoints at the city entrance. While they waited, Louisa tried to distract Beatrice with stories and simple games. The girl, though visibly tired, tried hard to maintain her enthusiasm, as if she understood the importance of every shared moment. "Aunt Louisa, do you think there are stars at the bottom of the sea?" she suddenly asked between 2 rounds of an improvised memory game with napkins. "Starfish, you mean?" "No, real stars, the ones that shine in the sky. Mom used to say that when the sun sets in the sea, it takes some stars to the bottom of the ocean to light the way for the fish at night." Louisa smiled at the beautiful image. "That's a very beautiful idea. And you know what? There's a phenomenon called bioluminescence, where some sea creatures actually glow in the dark, like stars at the bottom of the sea. Your mother might have been talking about that in a poetic way." Beatrice's eyes sparkled with the information. So she was right. There really are stars in the sea. She seemed genuinely happy with the confirmation that her mother's story had a basis in truth. The intercom interrupted the conversation. "Louisa, it's me, Richard. I'm with Andrew at the entrance. We're coming up." The relief at hearing Richard's voice was immense. Louisa pressed the intercom button to reply. "We're fine here. Beatrice is eager to see you." Minutes later, father and daughter embraced emotionally, while Louisa and Andrew talked in low voices in the opposite corner of the room. "Police have set up roadblocks at all entrances to Myrtle Beach," Andrew informed them. "But Deborah knows the area and might use secondary roads." Also, Dr. Paul called, worried, before escaping. She accessed one of the doctor's computers and checked Beatrice's medical records, including information about the trip to Myrtle Beach. Louisa felt a shiver run down her spine. Deborah's determination was frightening. What exactly was she planning to do? "Richard," Andrew called, interrupting the moment between father and daughter. "We need to discuss the next steps. The house is safe for now, but I suggest transferring Beatrice to a more protected location as soon as possible." Richard nodded, reluctant to leave his daughter, but aware of the seriousness of the situation. He joined the 2 adults while Beatrice savored another cookie, watching them with attentive eyes. "Police managed to track Deborah's cell phone to Charleston, South Carolina," Andrew continued. "That gives us some time, but not much. She's clearly coming here." "But what exactly does she want?" Richard asked, frustrated. "The incriminating documents are already with the police. The accounts have been frozen. The divorce is underway." "Revenge," Louisa replied simply. "She lost everything: money, status, freedom. In her mind we are to blame, especially—" She didn't complete the sentence, but her involuntary glance towards Beatrice said it all. Richard paled as he understood the implication. "I won't let her get near my daughter," he declared, with fierce determination. "The best option would be to remove Beatrice from here immediately," Andrew suggested. "I have contacts who can arrange a helicopter in less than an hour. We could take her back to Asheville or directly to a hospital in Atlanta." Richard looked at his daughter, assessing her condition. "What do you think, Louisa? Would she withstand the journey?" Louisa hesitated. Beatrice's vital signs were relatively stable, but the girl was clearly exhausted. The additional stress of an emergency evacuation could be risky. On the other hand, staying there with the threat of Deborah approaching, "I think we need to ask her," she finally replied. "Beatrice has shown remarkable understanding of the situation. She deserves to be part of this decision." Richard nodded, surprised but agreeing with the suggestion. Together they approached the sofa where the girl rested. We need to talk about something important," Richard began, sitting beside his daughter. "We're worried about Aunt Deborah coming here, and Mr. Andrews suggested you could go by helicopter to a safer place. What do you think about that?" Beatrice looked from her father to Louisa, and then to the window overlooking the sea. Her eyes, though tired, reflected a surprising understanding. "I really wanted to see the sunset from here too," she replied, with a simplicity that contrasted with the gravity of the situation. "From my wish list, only two things are left: seeing the sunset over the sea and finishing making the cookies. We've already seen the sunrise, but the sunset is different." Richard swallowed hard, visibly emotional. "But, Princess, we need to think about your safety." "I know, Daddy, but—" She hesitated, searching for words. "I don't think I'll get another chance to see the sunset over the sea. And I don't want to leave afraid of Aunt Deborah. I want to leave happy, looking at the colors of the sky." The silence that followed was laden with emotion. No adult in the room could hold back tears in the face of the wisdom and courage of that 7-year-old child. "If we stay," Richard finally said, "we need to ensure you are completely safe. That means we might have to stay in this room until the police find Deborah." Beatrice considered the proposal, looking around the comfortable room, but without windows overlooking the sea. "Can we watch the sunset from the veranda and then come back here?" "Please, Daddy. It's very important to me." Richard looked at Andrew, who frowned, clearly concerned about safety. Louisa intervened. "What if we increase security? Paramedic Henry is still around, right? Along with Andrew and Richard, we would have 3 men protecting the house. We could watch the sunset from the second-floor veranda, which offers a better view and is more protected." Andrew pondered the suggestion. "I can call 2 more colleagues who are in Charleston, South Carolina. They would arrive in about 40 minutes. With 5 people monitoring the perimeter, it would be possible to create adequate protection for this specific moment." Richard looked at his daughter, whose eyes silently pleaded. How could he deny her a last wish, especially something as simple as watching the sunset? "All right," he finally agreed, "but only if the security plan is approved by Andrew, and you promise to rest until then to regain your strength. The sunset isn't until 6 p.m. Beatrice's face lit up with a smile that warmed everyone's hearts. "I promise. I'll rest a lot to be strong for the sunset." While Richard and Andrew left to organize security, Louisa helped Beatrice settle into a small makeshift bed on the sofa. The girl was visibly exhausted but reluctant to fall asleep. "What if I fall asleep and don't wake up in time for the sunset?" she asked with a hint of fear in her voice. "I promise I'll wake you up," Louisa assured her, adjusting the pillows. "I would never break a promise to you, Bee." The girl seemed satisfied with the assurance and closed her eyes. In a few minutes her breathing became regular, indicating she had fallen asleep. Louisa took the opportunity to check her vital signs once more. They weren't ideal, but considering the circumstances, they were acceptable. Richard returned to the room an hour later, finding Beatrice sleeping peacefully and Louisa sitting beside her, making notes in her medical diary. "How is she?" he asked softly, approaching. "Stable but fragile," Louisa replied honestly. "The day was emotionally intense for her." "How are the security preparations?" Andrew managed to contact his colleagues. "They'll be here in 20 minutes. The police have also intensified the search for Deborah. Apparently she abandoned the car in Charleston, South Carolina, and took a taxi, which makes tracking difficult." Louisa nodded, worried. "She seems determined." "Always stubborn," Richard commented, sitting heavily in a nearby armchair. "It was one of the qualities I admired in her at first. I never imagined that determination could turn into something so destructive." For a few moments they remained silent, only the sound of Beatrice's soft breathing filling the room. "Thank you," Richard said suddenly, looking directly at Louisa. "For everything you've done for Beatrice. For us." "You don't need to thank me," she replied with a small smile. "As I said before, I care deeply about her." "It's not just that," Richard insisted, leaning forward. "You brought light back into our lives, Louisa. After Beatrice's diagnosis, I got lost in work and denial, leaving room for Deborah to manipulate everything. You rescued us from that. You gave Beatrice the chance to have truly happy moments in her last days." Louisa felt tears well up in her eyes. "She taught me more than I could ever teach her. Her courage, her joy despite everything. It's inspiring." "Carolyn would have loved you," Richard commented with a melancholic smile. "She always said the universe puts the right people in our path when we need them most." The comment touched Louisa deeply. There was something almost mystical about the way she had arrived in that family. A storm, a broken car, a coincidence that now seemed predestined. The conversation was interrupted by a call on the intercom. It was Andrew, informing them that his colleagues had arrived and that the security plan was being implemented. There was also news from the police. Deborah had been seen at a gas station on the road to Myrtle Beach, approximately 30 minutes away. "The plan is as follows," Andrew explained when he joined them in the panic room. "At 5:30 p.m., we'll take Beatrice to the second-floor veranda to watch the sunset. We'll have men positioned at strategic points around the property. After the sunset, we'll return immediately to the panic room and wait until the police capture Deborah." The plan seemed solid, but Louisa couldn't completely shake the feeling of apprehension. There was something about Deborah's determination that frightened her, an obsession that seemed capable of overcoming any obstacle. The following hours passed slowly. Beatrice continued to sleep, waking only briefly for water and medication. Richard alternated between staying beside his daughter and assisting Andrew with security preparations. Louisa remained vigilant, constantly monitoring the girl's vital signs and making detailed notes. As the afternoon progressed, the sky began to show the first signs of the spectacle to come. Some scattered clouds took on pink hues, foreshadowing a sunset that promised to be magnificent. At 5:15 p.m., Louisa gently woke Beatrice as she had promised. The girl slowly opened her eyes, initially confused, but soon smiled as she remembered the plan. "Is it time for the sunset?" she asked, her voice small but animated. "Almost, dear. We need to get ready." "How are you feeling?" "A little tired but happy," Beatrice replied, trying to sit up. "I don't want to miss the sunset for anything in the world." Richard entered at that moment, bringing a soft blanket and a small teddy bear they had bought at a souvenir shop on the beach. "Look what I found for you, Princess, to keep you company while we watch the show." Beatrice's face lit up when she saw the gift, a blue plush dolphin with a pink ribbon around its neck. "It's beautiful, Daddy." "I'll call him Star, like the starfish that glow at the bottom of the ocean." While they helped Beatrice get ready, Andrew made a final security check over the intercom. His men were in position, and there were no signs of Deborah or any suspicious activity nearby. At 5:25 p.m., they were ready. Richard carried Beatrice in his arms, while Louisa managed the portable oxygen equipment. Andrew led the way out of the panic room, checking each hallway and staircase before allowing them to proceed. The second-floor veranda offered a spectacular panoramic view of the ocean. The sky was already beginning to be tinged with vibrant colors. Orange, pink, purple, and gold mingled in a breathtaking natural painting. Richard settled Beatrice in a comfortable lounge chair, strategically positioned for the best view, while Louisa adjusted the oxygen flow. "It's more beautiful than I remembered," Beatrice whispered, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sky. She hugged the plush dolphin to her chest with one hand, while the other firmly held her father's hand. The four remained in reverent silence as the natural spectacle unfolded before them. The sun, a perfect sphere of orange fire, slowly descended towards the sea, painting the sky and waters with increasingly intense colors. "Is Mom seeing this too?" Beatrice asked as she had in the morning. "Absolutely," Richard replied, gently squeezing his daughter's hand. "And I'm sure she's as amazed as we are." At that moment, the intercom on the wall emitted a static noise, followed by an urgent voice from one of the security guards. "Suspicious movement at the side gate. A woman managed to bypass the perimeter. Repeat, intruder in the perimeter." Louisa's heart pounded. Andrew immediately drew a weapon he kept hidden under his jacket and positioned himself defensively at the entrance to the veranda. "Richard, take Beatrice and Louisa back to the panic room." "Now," he ordered, his voice brooking no argument. "No, please," Beatrice pleaded, clinging to her father. "The sun hasn't completely set yet. Just a few more minutes, please." Richard looked anxiously from Beatrice to Andrew, torn between his daughter's safety and his desire to fulfill her last request. 30 seconds, Andrew conceded, after a moment's hesitation. No more than that. Those 30 seconds felt like an eternity. Richard hugged Beatrice protectively, while Louisa remained vigilant beside them. Andrew stayed by the door in constant communication with his men via radio. The sun touched the horizon, creating a stunning effect as its last rays streamed across the ocean. Beatrice smiled, completely immersed in the beauty of the moment, seemingly oblivious to the approaching danger. "It's time," Andrew announced firmly, when the solar disk was halfway below the horizon. Richard nodded, picking Beatrice up in his arms. The girl didn't protest this time, seeming satisfied with what she had witnessed. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered, resting her head on his shoulder. It was perfect. As they hurried down the hallway towards the stairs leading to the attic, the sound of breaking glass downstairs froze them in their tracks. Then a woman's voice echoed through the house laden with hatred and despair. "I know you're up there. Richard, you won't escape this time." It was Deborah, and by the tone of her voice she was completely out of her mind. "Continue to the attic," Andrew whispered, defensively holding his weapon. "I'll stop her." "No," Richard protested. "She might be armed. I don't want anyone to get hurt." Beatrice clung to her father's neck, trembling slightly, but making no sound. Her eyes, wide and frightened, reflected not only fear but also a surprising determination. "Richard," Deborah's voice sounded closer, coming from the staircase. "You destroyed my life. Years of planning, years of putting up with that sick brat, and for what? For you to throw it all away because of this meddling little nurse." A sound of struggle followed, and then the horrible thud of a body falling heavily to the floor. Louisa and Richard exchanged alarmed glances, uncertain about who had gotten the worst of it. "The veranda," Richard finally decided. "There's a trellis beside it covered in ivy. We can use it to climb down. Can you manage with Beatrice?" Louisa asked, concerned both for the girl's safety and the weight Richard would have to bear. "I'll try," he replied, determined. "You go first so you can help receive Beatrice down there." Louisa hesitated, worried about leaving them, but understood the logic. She quickly went to the veranda, looking back one last time to check on Beatrice, who seemed strangely calm, clutching her plush dolphin. "I'll be quick," Louisa promised, swinging one leg over the railing. At that moment, the bedroom door burst open violently. Deborah was there, panting, with a cut on her forehead and bloodshot eyes, a terrifying vision of obsession and hatred. "So this is where you're hiding," she declared, a distorted smile twisting her lips. In her right hand, she held an object that made Louisa's blood run cold, a syringe full of clear liquid. "Deborah, stop," Richard pleaded, positioning himself protectively in front of Beatrice. "The police are on their way. You'll only make your situation worse." "My situation?" She laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "My situation couldn't be worse, Richard. I lost everything. My status, my money, my freedom. Because of her," she pointed to Beatrice, "and this meddling nurse." "It's not their fault," Richard argued, trying to buy time while looking for an escape. "I should have realized what was happening sooner. I should have protected my daughter." "Your daughter," Deborah spat, taking a step forward. "It was always about her. All your love, all your attention, all your money, all for Caroline's precious memory. Well, soon she won't be a problem anymore, will she? Her days are numbered." "Get out of here now," Louisa intervened, abandoning the escape attempt and placing herself beside Richard. "Andrew has already called for reinforcements. In minutes, this place will be surrounded by police." "Andrew is temporarily unavailable," Deborah replied with a malicious smile. "Nothing serious, just a little bump on the head. Enough to give us privacy for one last family meeting." She raised the syringe and the room light reflected off the liquid. "Do you know what this is?" "A concentrated dose of morphine. Enough to make someone sleep forever. Originally, it was for you, Richard. Part of my final plan, before everything fell apart. But now I think it would be more poetic to use it on your precious little daughter." "No," Richard shouted, taking a step forward. "Stay where you are," Deborah ordered, her voice rising an octave. "Or I swear I'll use this right now." The standoff was terrible. Louisa watched the scene with horror, her mind racing to find a way out. Beatrice's oxygen equipment had been left on the other side of the room, and the girl was beginning to show signs of respiratory distress. "Why are you doing this, Deborah?" Louisa asked, trying to distract her and buy time. "You've already lost. This will only make everything worse for you." "Lose?" Deborah tilted her head as if considering the question. "Perhaps, but at least I won't go alone. He," she pointed to Richard, "will feel the same pain I felt. He will know what it's like to lose everything that matters." It was at that moment that something unexpected happened. Beatrice, who had remained silent until then, stepped forward, separating herself from Richard's protection. "Aunt Deborah," she called, her voice surprisingly firm for a child in that situation. "Why don't you like me?" The question, so direct and innocent, seemed to momentarily destabilize Deborah. She blinked, confused by the approach. "What?" "I always tried to be good," Beatrice continued, taking another small step forward, still clutching her plush dolphin tightly. "I cleaned the house as you asked, took the medicines you gave me, didn't complain when it hurt, but you never liked me. I just wanted to know why." Deborah seemed unnerved by the simplicity of the question and the girl's courage. You were an obstacle," she finally replied. "Everything was about you. Your father's money, his time, everything for Beatrice. I was just a convenient accessory." "But I just wanted a mom," Beatrice replied, her voice slightly choked. "After Mom left, I was alone. When Daddy married you, I thought I'd have a new mom. Someone who would tell stories, bake cookies with me, give me hugs when I was scared." The girl's words, so sincere and vulnerable, seemed to touch something in Deborah. For a brief moment, something akin to shame passed through her eyes. "It was too late for that," she murmured, almost to herself. "The doctors had already said you wouldn't last long. Emotionally investing would be wasting feelings." "It's never a waste to love someone," Louisa intervened softly, "even if only for a short time." Deborah looked at her with renewed anger. "And what do you know about that? How long have you been here? A few weeks? And you already act like you're part of the family." "She is part of the family," Beatrice affirmed, taking another step forward. Now she was almost within Deborah's reach, who still held the syringe menacingly. "Aunt Louisa showed me what it's like to have someone who truly cares, not just because they have to, but because they choose to care." Richard and Louisa watched the scene with a mixture of terror and admiration. Beatrice's courage was extraordinary, but also extremely dangerous. "Beatrice, come back," Richard pleaded, extending his hand. "No, Daddy," the girl replied, without taking her eyes off Deborah. "I need to say this." She took another small step, now less than a yard from Deborah. The woman seemed frozen, the syringe still raised but her hand slightly trembling. "I know I won't live much longer," Beatrice continued, with impressive maturity. "The doctors said so and I can feel it, but I don't want to leave with anger or fear. I learned from Aunt Louisa that I can choose how I feel, even when everything seems difficult." Deborah swallowed hard, visibly shaken by the child's words. "And I choose to forgive you, Aunt Deborah," Beatrice concluded with a small smile. "Because holding on to anger only makes my heart heavy, and I want it to be light for when I meet Mom." A profound silence fell over the room. Beatrice's words, so simple and yet so profound, echoed around them like a kind of ancient and powerful magic. Deborah seemed to have been struck by an invisible force. Her eyes, once hard and full of hatred, now showed confusion and perhaps the slightest glimpse of remorse. Her hand, holding the syringe, began to tremble more intensely. Unexpected tears welled up in her eyes. "You don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "It can't be that simple." "Sometimes it is," Beatrice replied, extending her small hand, offering the plush dolphin to Deborah. "Sometimes we just need to remember what it's like to be kind." It was at that moment that a shrill sound of sirens broke the air, coming from the road. Blue and red lights began to flash, visible from the open veranda. The police had finally arrived. Deborah looked around like a cornered animal. For a terrible moment, Louisa feared she might, in a last act of desperation, use the syringe on Beatrice. But then something surprising happened. The syringe fell from Deborah's hand, rolling across the floor. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, and she sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. "It's over," she murmured through tears. "Everything is over." Richard rushed to grab Beatrice, pulling her away from Deborah. Louisa quickly kicked the syringe away, sending it under a dresser. At that moment, Andrew appeared at the door, one hand pressed to a wound on his temple, but still alert and functional. Behind him, police officers stormed the house, their voices echoing through the hallway. "Is everyone all right?" Andrew asked, quickly assessing the scene. "Yes," Richard replied, hugging Beatrice protectively. "Thanks to this little heroine." The police entered the room, quickly subduing Deborah, who offered no resistance. As they handcuffed her and read her rights, she kept her gaze fixed on Beatrice, an indescribable expression on her face, perhaps the first genuine glimpse of humanity she had shown in a long time. Beatrice, back in her father's safe arms, began to show signs of extreme exhaustion. Her breathing became more labored, and a worrying pallor spread across her face. "We need the oxygen," Louisa warned, rushing to get the equipment. "And call an ambulance. She needs immediate medical attention." The following hours passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics arrived and stabilized Beatrice, who was taken to the local hospital. Deborah was taken into police custody, while Andrew coordinated with authorities the details of what had happened. Richard and Louisa remained by Beatrice's side at the hospital, taking turns so the girl was never alone. Dr. Paul was contacted and took an emergency helicopter to Myrtle Beach, arriving a few hours later to personally supervise the treatment. It was during the early hours of the morning, while Louisa rested in an armchair beside the hospital bed, that Beatrice briefly woke up. Her eyes met Louisa's and a small smile formed on her lips. "Aunt Louisa," she called in a whisper. "I had a beautiful dream." "Oh, really?" Louisa replied, leaning closer, gently holding the girl's hand. "Do you want to tell me?" "I dreamed of Mom," Beatrice said, her eyes shining despite her tiredness. She was on a beautiful beach, with water so blue it looked like the sky. There were dolphins jumping around her and she was waving at me. Louisa felt a tightening in her heart, but maintained her smile. "That sounds like a wonderful dream, dear." "She said she's waiting for me," Beatrice continued, her voice almost inaudible now, "but that I don't need to rush. She said you and Daddy need me a little longer." A tear rolled down Louisa's face, which she quickly wiped away. "Your mother is very wise." "Aunt Louisa," Beatrice hesitated, as if organizing an important thought. "If I go to visit Mom, will you promise to take care of Daddy? And Star too." She was referring to the plush dolphin which rested beside her on the bed. "I promise, my love," Louisa replied. Her voice choked. "With all my heart." Satisfied, Beatrice closed her eyes again, a small smile still playing on her lips. "Thank you. You're going to be a great mom to your baby. And to Daddy, too." With those words, she fell back asleep, leaving Louisa by her bed, tears now streaming freely down her face. The next morning, Beatrice's condition had stabilized enough for Dr. Paul to deem it safe to transfer her. The decision was to return to Asheville, where the Maxwell mansion was equipped with all the necessary medical structure for palliative care. "I want to go home," Beatrice confirmed when consulted about the decision. "But can we come back here one day to visit our sandcastle?" Richard nodded, though all the adults present knew that promise likely couldn't be kept. "Of course, Princess. We'll come back when you're stronger." The return journey was made in a mobile ICU ambulance, with Dr. Paul personally accompanying them. Richard and Louisa followed closely behind, in a silence laden with contradictory emotions. Relief that the danger posed by Deborah was over, gratitude for the precious moments lived in Myrtle Beach, and the overwhelming pain of what they knew was approaching. 3 days later, back home, Beatrice expressed an unexpected wish. "I want to make more cookies, the ones we started in Myrtle Beach." The girl was significantly weaker, confined to bed most of the time, but her spirit remained unyielding. Louisa, always attentive to her wishes, arranged everything so they could make the cookies directly in Beatrice's room. A small electric oven was installed, along with a table adapted over the bed. Richard, Louisa, and Beatrice spent the afternoon laughing and telling stories, making what the girl called the best cookies in the world. This time, Louisa remembered to bring confectioner's sugar to sprinkle on top, just as Caroline used to do. "Perfect," Beatrice declared after biting into a still-warm cookie, "exactly like Mom's." That night, while Beatrice slept, Richard found Louisa on the veranda, contemplating the stars that dotted the mountain sky. "Dr. Paul spoke with me today," he said, joining her on the bench. "He says it's a matter of days now." Louisa nodded, holding back tears. There was nothing to say that could alleviate that pain. "I want to thank you for everything you've done," Richard continued. His voice choked. "Without you, these last days wouldn't have been what they were. Beatrice would have left without fulfilling her dreams, without feeling truly loved and protected." "She changed my life," Louisa replied simply. "She taught me more about courage and love than any adult ever could." They remained silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. Then Richard spoke again. "What will you do next? When everything is over?" The question took Louisa by surprise. In recent weeks, she had focused so much on the present, on caring for Beatrice, that she had barely thought about the future. "I don't know," she admitted. "Go back to Charlotte, North Carolina, perhaps. I have some friends there who can help me with the baby." "Or you could stay," Richard suggested, hesitant. "There's space here, structure for the baby, and—" he hesitated, choosing his words. "I think Beatrice would like that, to know that you and your baby are here, where she spent her last happy moments." The proposal touched Louisa deeply. She had already grown fond not only of Beatrice, but also of Richard. A connection born of shared adversity had blossomed into something more. Respect, admiration, and perhaps the beginning of something that could one day be called love. "I'll think about it," she promised. "But regardless of the decision, know that Beatrice will always be a part of my life. And you will too." The following week, on a sunny Saturday morning, Beatrice asked to be taken to the mansion's terrace. "I want to see the sun rising over the mountains," she explained. "I've seen it over the sea. Now I want to see how it's different here." Richard and Louisa granted the request, preparing a comfortable makeshift bed on the terrace. Dr. Paul, who had practically moved into the mansion in recent days, supervised the transfer, ensuring that all necessary medical equipment was available. At 5:30 a.m., the three were on the terrace, wrapped in soft blankets against the cool mountain air. Beatrice was between Richard and Louisa, each holding one of her hands, as they watched the horizon begin to lighten. "It's different from the sea," the girl observed, her voice almost a whisper now. "There the sun comes out of the water like a surprise. Here it paints the mountains first, like an artist preparing the canvas." "It's beautiful," Richard agreed, gently squeezing his daughter's hand. "Thank you for showing us this, Princess." As the sun rose, bathing the valley in its golden light, Beatrice seemed to absorb every detail, every nuance of color and shadow. Her eyes, though tired, shone with a tranquil joy. "I'm not afraid anymore," she suddenly declared, surprising Richard and Louisa. "Afraid of what, dear?" Louisa asked, gently stroking her hair. "Of leaving," Beatrice replied with the disconcerting simplicity of children. "Before I was, but now I'm not. I know Mum is waiting and that you two will be okay." She looked first at her father and then at Louisa. "You have each other now, and soon you'll have the baby too." Richard swallowed hard, unable to speak. Louisa felt tears stream down her face, but made no move to wipe them away. "And you know what?" Beatrice continued, smiling as she watched the sun now completely above the horizon. "I think I'll be able to see these sunrises whenever I want. From a special place where it doesn't hurt anymore and I don't need tubes to breathe." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the warmth of the first sunbeams. When she opened them again, there was a profound peace in them. "I'm tired now," she said softly. "Can we stay here a little longer? Just like this, together?" "Of course, my love," Richard replied, his voice choked. "For as long as you want." They remained like that in silence, hands intertwined, as the sun climbed higher and higher in the sky. Beatrice, nestled between the two people who loved her most in this world, fell asleep with a serene smile on her lips. Hours later, as the sun began its downward journey in the sky, Beatrice closed her eyes for the last time, surrounded by the love she had so longed for during her brief existence. The following week, in an intimate and emotional ceremony, Beatrice was buried in the small family cemetery on the Maxwell estate, beside her mother, Caroline. The day was perfectly clear, with a deep blue sky that resembled the ocean of Myrtle Beach. On her grave, Richard placed not only flowers, but also seashells collected during their visit to the beach, and the small plush dolphin she had loved so much in her last days. After the ceremony, as the few guests departed, Richard and Louisa remained before the grave, holding hands united by shared grief, but also by something more, a silent promise made to a brave little girl. "I found this among her things," Richard said, pulling a folded envelope from his pocket. "It's a letter she dictated to the night nurse 2 days before she passed away. Hers addressed to both of us." Louisa looked surprised at the envelope. With trembling hands, Richard opened it and began to read. "Dear Daddy and dear Aunt Louisa, if you are reading this, it's because I've already gone to visit Mom. Please don't be sad for too long. Remember the cookies we made together, the sandcastle, the sunrise and sunset we saw. They were the happiest days of my life. Daddy, you promised you would take care of Star for me, don't forget. And please, smile more. You have a beautiful smile, you know. Aunt Louisa, thank you for showing me what it's like to have a real mother, even for a short time." I know you're going to be a wonderful mother to the baby. I hope it's a girl so you can tell her about me. And there's one more very important thing. You two need to take care of each other. Daddy needs someone to make him smile. And you, Aunt Louisa, need someone to take care of you and the baby. So please and stay together, okay? It will be like I left a little bit of myself with you. I'll ask Mum to send you shooting stars every now and then just to remind you that we're watching. With all my love, Fartulke. The letter ended, leaving Richard and Louisa in silent tears. Beatrice's words, so simple and yet so profound, echoed around them like a blessing. She was always wiser than all of us, Richard commented, carefully folding the letter back into the envelope. Yes, Louisa agreed, stroking her now quite prominent belly. She saw things that we adults often miss. At that moment, as if responding to the thought, Louisa's baby gave a vigorous kick. She took Richard's hand and placed it on her belly, allowing him to feel the movement. He or she will know everything about their older sister, Louisa promised. About how brave, intelligent, and full of love she was. And about how she brought us together, Richard added, keeping his hand on Louisa's belly. Like a small light that illuminated our path, even in the deepest darkness. 2 months later, in the same hospital where they had spent their last moments with Beatrice, Sophia Caldwell Maxwell was born, a healthy baby girl with curious eyes that surprisingly resembled Beatrice's. Richard was by Louisa's side throughout the birth, fulfilling the silent promise they had made to the girl who had changed their lives. When Sophia turned 6 months old, they made their first trip to Myrtle Beach. They took her to the same beach where they had built the sandcastle with Beatrice, and although the original castle had long since been washed away by the waves, they built a new one, bigger and more elaborate, with a small flag on top that simply read, Beatrice. On the first anniversary of Beatrice's passing, Richard and Louisa married in an intimate ceremony in the garden of the Asheville mansion. Sophia, now 10 months old, watched from her paternal grandmother's lap, smiling as if she understood the importance of the moment. After the ceremony, Richard surprised Louisa with a special gift, the deed to a new foundation called Beatrice's Light, dedicated to providing moments of joy and fulfilling the wishes of children with terminal illnesses. The first unit was already under construction in Atlanta, with plans for expansion to other major cities. I want her legacy to live on, Richard explained. May other children experience the joy she felt in those last days. May none of them be neglected or feel alone. The Beatrice's Light Foundation grew rapidly, becoming one of the largest organizations supporting children with serious illnesses in the country. Its facilities, always colorful and welcoming, featured large windows that allowed children to watch the sunrise and sunset, no matter where they were. In each unit, there was a plaque with a photo of Beatrice smiling on Myrtle Beach, and below it, the phrase that had become the foundation's motto, "This light never fades." And it truly didn't fade. Beatrice's love, her courage, and her wisdom lived on not only in the hearts of Richard, Louisa, and Sophia, but also in the countless lives touched by her story and the Foundation's work. Years later, on a summer afternoon in Myrtle Beach, Louisa watched Sophia, now 5 years old, playing on the same beach where Beatrice had fulfilled her last wishes. The girl, with her dark curls swaying in the wind, was building an elaborate sandcastle, with her father as her helper, patiently following her instructions. "Look, Mommy," Sophia called, pointing to the horizon. "Dolphins!" And indeed, there they were, a small group of dolphins gracefully leaping over the waves, exactly as they had done on that special morning years ago. "See, Mommy?" Sophia continued, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Bee sent them to visit us, just like you told me in the stories." Louisa felt her eyes fill with tears. Richard, noticing the moment, approached and put his arm around her shoulders. "I think she'll always be around somehow," he murmured, watching the dolphins continue their natural spectacle. "I'm sure of it," Louisa replied, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. "As long as we remember her, as long as we continue her legacy of love and compassion, Beatrice will never truly leave." Sophia turned her attention back to the sandcastle, now decorating it with colorful seashells she had collected. On her face, occasionally, it was possible to see expressions that incredibly resembled Beatrice. The same determination, the same genuine joy in simple things. "Mommy, when we go home, can we make those special cookies?" Sophia asked, without taking her eyes off her artwork in the sand. "The ones you say are Bee's recipe?" "Of course, my love," Louisa smiled. "We'll make as many cookies as you want." As the sun began its descent towards the ocean, the family remained on the beach, enjoying every moment together, aware of the precious gift that life had given them, each other, and the memories of the little girl who, in her brief existence, had taught everyone the true meaning of love, forgiveness and courage. And somewhere, beyond the horizon where the sky meets the sea, perhaps Beatrice was smiling, satisfied to see that her last wish had come true, that those she loved had found happiness, and that her light continued to shine, illuminating the path of so many others.